Hi, everyone. Welcome to Forbes Newsroom. I'm Diane Brady, and I'm here with Gordon Chang, who is a senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute. And also, Gordon, I know, of course, famously the author of The Coming Collapse of China. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Diane.
So I want to start with what to make of President Xi Jinping's response at this point. We've seen protests. Now we're seeing some easing of policies. How are you thinking about that?
It's really a very confusing situation in China right now. We had those extraordinary protests that followed the November 24th fire. Those protests are fascinating because they were not coordinated, there was no leadership, they were not organized, but they were countrywide, which indicates that people in China are thinking the same thing. And that means that they will react the same way, which means that probably we will see more protests in the future. Now, clearly, Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, got the message. They are now sending signal from Beijing to relax policy. But local officials are under an impossible situation because they're also told to make sure there are no more cases. So they've got two contradictory guidelines. I think what we're seeing, and this is, I think, a good development in a sense, and that is that local officials are experimenting. So even within the same municipality or city, you'll see many different policies. And eventually, one of two things will happen. Either a good policy will emerge nationwide, or there will continue to be confusion. But right now, this is one of the most interesting developments in policymaking in the world today.
Well, how unusual is it to have that level of local experimentation? And is it unusual under Xi, or has it been unusual for many years?
This really, to find something comparable, I think you'd have to go back to the early years of Deng Xiaoping, who was Mao Zedong's successor. Because Deng in 1978, at the famous Third Plenum, actually signaled that China would reform and open up. And there was no clear direction as to specifically what to do, but we saw experimentation all across China. And that was one of the most exciting periods in communist Chinese history. Well, we're seeing something similar now, although Xi Jinping does believe in totalitarian controls, but nonetheless, he's being forced to open up. And that is this dynamic between the Chinese people and the Communist Party, which really means, last month we heard everybody say, well, Xi Jinping has consolidated his control over the party. And yes, that was right, at least from the moment. But at the same time, we could also see that the party was losing control over Chinese society. And that was evident from these protests at the Apple iPhone plant in Zhengzhou, the Foxconn facility. And that really was an indication that there could be extraordinary developments, which in fact did occur after that fire.
No, I know we've had protests in Hong Kong. We've certainly had protests, around Urumqi but how much of this is it's explicitly tied to COVID? And if the restrictions are eased, is that going to, in your mind, address that just general discontent in the population, or is this a Pandora's box?
I think it's actually more than just COVID. Now, obviously, the COVID restrictions were the motivating factor because in that fire, it was clear that firefighters couldn't get to the building for some time because of the COVID blockades, and also because people were sealed into their apartments. So that is the motivating factor. But very quickly, Diane, we heard people go beyond just COVID and saying, down with Xi Jinping, down with the Communist Party. And that was a revolutionary sentiment. So there will be problems in the future because there will be incidents, maybe COVID related, maybe not, that will trigger protests. So China right now is in one of these very uncertain, very volatile situations where anything can happen.